The news is serious stuff. Serious. After men began to think and publish newspapers, they soon added the letters to the editor feature so that readers could apparently react to what they'd been made to think about. This worked so well that the human mind quickly adopted something quite similar. Second version. After men began to think and publish newspapers, they soon added the letters to the editor feature so that readers could apparently react to what they'd been made to think about, and a viewer writes, I would find this story much more appealing if you had said, so that readers could apparently react to what they'd been led to think about rather than what they'd been made to think about. P.S. Why did you say so that readers could apparently react? How the hell does apparently enter into this? Sincerely, etc. And to think that was just the first page of the news. Huh? There was once an apartment building in which those upstairs would get a chill when those on lower floors were cold. But what really seemed strange was that this occurred without those upstairs having any knowledge of downstairs conditions. There is a legend of a man who once undertook to trace the connections that tied his multi-level dwelling together. And you might note the lack of popularity this tale has experienced. One man's motto was, "Who the hell wants to know anyway?" I'm sorry, that was actually said by a particular set of local conditions, acting as always through man on behalf of life. Corrected adage for the alert. What I don't know won't hurt me as long as I don't know anything. There was once a pigeon with a curious glow in its eye who decided to leap from the top of a tall building and soar into its deep, dark bowels. The flashes of light seen at the foundations. One man awoke to find himself in the middle of a parade, and wherever the parade went, so went he. There was once a man who got a real good glimpse of the secret, and after that had as his goal a desire for complete freedom. But soon he realized that any concept he'd have of freedom was always flawed and incomprehensive, and in ways he couldn't fully understand or rectify. What a mess, he thought. What a mess to be held in a place where you don't know is, while longing to be where you don't know where. Were it not such a beautifully balanced and revealing mess I face, I'd hardly know where to go from here. Praise be to thee, O mess of messes. Praise be to thee, O delightful mess. The range of suicide's popularity at any given time is tied to the number of cows at the western frontier posed to push on to that greater unknown. Anyone who says that they're conscious is a liar. Okay, anyone who says that they're conscious is a liar, or else extremely confused. There is a dark hole that goes nowhere, and those who do not know this are those who concoct fantastic speculative tales regarding its ultimate destination. A soldier returned from the front lines and said, I have seen the enemy face to face and up close, and I do not at this time wish to say anything further about exactly who it is. During the celebration of one of his middle years' birthdays, the king asked his personal advisor, has the time come that I should increase my reading in pursuit of knowledge? And the counselor replied, better, my lord, would be a transfusion. Royal moral. you can only go so far. Which, on top of that, is never as far as people believe. But I'm king, and in control of all I survey, whined the ruler. All the more reason, your grace, that you among all should realize this. The head of a people, or a nervous system, to ever govern properly must ultimately discover that he is the people and the people are in him. And this is not political metaphor, yet too dangerous to be presented as fact. Leastwise to those with weak blood. A man in a tree once scratched his knee and wondered, could you get a fish to take a drink of water? A sign in the middle of a desert declared the message, repair yourself. From another room, the father's voice called out to the kid, be still. A few minutes later, it cried out again, then be conscious. And this time the lad responded, well, which will it be? Very funny, the old man replied. As some feared that they were being led away to the intellectual pepper mines, a voice was heard to comment, the nice thing about being ordinary and stupid is that you have no resources to call upon. Hear, hear, a few others were heard to add. Another chapter in our considering series of the I Don't Get It tales. Once upon a time, life offered to spoon-feed this really sincere but apparently weak chap. Then suddenly shouted, not. It was just a joke. Is life a real little kidder or what? One man said, it's a bad thing to talk about someone when they're not present. And his companion thought, well, I guess that leaves consciousness out of the conversation. A king held a costume ball, then became upset when he couldn't recognize some of the guests in their disguises. Sheep want to be part of a flock, and cows have no interest in things non-bovid. And a more alert man comes to realize the same situation dominating his thinking. A robin once lamented, it's hard to learn the accordion when there is no encouragement from other birds. And the wind gently whispered, "Aw, tough shit." When one man saw the saw that says, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen, he forthwith slapped himself smartly on the forehead and cried out, that's it. Listen to me in there, all you flabby, disheveled thoughts. Do you see the point? Are we finally going to get it? Life will allow men to wander a ways from the collective, but not too far. And to keep them in check relies on their indigenous desire for the familiar and their inherent uneasiness with solo activity. A sign stuck on the mountaintop inquired, is not the fact that men can think of themselves as improved strong indication that they could be? In another galaxy was once a planet on which there were some unusual creatures. They were normally one height, but could make themselves taller just by holding an awareness of the possibility. And you think life on Earth is weird. And now tonight, stop at our inspirational corner. 'Tis rumored that a passenger was once heard to comment under his breath, if this thing's really going to Istanbul, I wish the hell it'd finally get there. And if it's not, I wish the hell that someone would finally tell me. But in either case, God, but I'm sick of riding this son of a bitch. By the by, it has been noted that some people are more easily inspired than others. I don't know, I just thought you might find that of interest. Duh. And now yet another important test that you can self-administer. How to tell that you're dead. You're complaining. As they strolled along a city street one day, a boy once inquired of his pater companion, "Why do so many of those whose primary residence is in the higher stories of our local structures find certain activities of those on the lower floors so fascinating?" And his father tapped his forehead and yelled out, "Jump ball!" And once again, the lad's awareness drew delightfully close to understanding what the old man meant. How things go, part, etc., etc. If someone could be born already more conscious than the first time they heard of such a thing, they'd find it funny. Say, not so fast there, me laddie. Isn't that exactly how the ordinary do react to such notions? The man does raise an interesting point. And that concludes tonight's episode of How Things Go. A fable for our, say, what time is it? Two fleas were talking and the first one said, "Take my word for it. Don't ever take up weight training, because once you start to get stronger, there's no going back." And the second one said, "You mean to being stupid?" "Exactola, old chum, you hit it right between the eyebrows." A man standing nearby and overhearing all this said to himself, "What in the world do they think strength has to do with weakness?" A little more math, maestro, if you please. The ordinarily see mankind divided up into numerous divisions of two, which is an inchoate view. Those who learn the secret also see man divided up into two groups, but in their case it is a correct and complete view. They merely recognize the simple fact that a man either knows the secret about life or else he doesn't, and that constitutes the only proper division of man. Herds are held together by more than hormones. Human herds, that is. A publisher asked a mystic to write his life story and said he had already had a title for it, "The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Mystic." And the focused one said to himself, "What other kind is there? Thank God." One man was so concerned about what he said that he didn't say anything. A certain king, upon hearing this, announced, "Bring that man to me." But he was not to be found, at least not by the minions of rulers verbose. One day a guy discovered that he could darn near think without using words, and was really excited over his discovery, until he realized it was just consciousness. "Shh," said one man, "don't pass it along." "Good," said life. One day a passenger, spelled with 3 S's, said, "This whole trip's beginning to confuse me something awful." And the conductor said, "Then why don't you get off?" And the passenger replied, And now for some sports results. Invariably, whenever the weak visit a new place, they expect a moral to go along with it. There's your moral. News regarding the collective always appears dire. Transport tip from our viewer's guide. As you heard noted earlier in tonight's show, if you can't be still, you can't be conscious. There was once a legend, which life suppressed, which said that thoughts were originally physical entities separate from man, but that somehow they got trapped inside of his head. Not a pretty sight to contemplate. A small bit of news that might help. Everyone is buried before they're actually dead. Well, did it help or not? Those who search for and speak of man's soul do so that they can more easily not look at what it is that they're really talking about. And one man said, "I don't get it." And life said, "Good." As long as we're at it, there's also this piece of a myth that says it was men realizing what a heartless bastard life could be that was the motivation for them coming up with the idea of God to replace what they'd originally seen. And one man said, "I don't like it." And life said, "Good." Another self-administered test. As long as you think that there are people more conscious than you, there are. See, now that didn't hurt. And one man said, "Hell, it didn't." Our kind of man or what? Those who say that their primary concern in life is for future generations aren't yet quite alive themselves. The ordinary praising intelligence is like distillers touting moderation. I think we should all. Okay, here's the good news. The good news is that all the bad news predicted won't happen. Oh, and here's an interesting little story. One man put a stack of paper next to his typewriter, sat down before it, and said, "I will not be satisfied until I have filled all of these pages with my thoughts." I know this was going somewhere, but for the life of me, I forgot where. A man went into a shoe repairer's shop and asked the chap behind the counter, "Do you have leather?" And the cobbler replied, "Yes." And the man asked, "Do you have nails?" And the cobbler replied, "Yes." And the man asked, "Do you have a hammer?" And the cobbler replied, "Yes." And the man said, "Then why do you not make some rice pudding?" And the cobbler replied, "Because I'm too tied up in making shoes." And the man said, "Oh, yes, yet another hoary parable corrected to its proper size for your modern viewing convenience." And the cobbler slipped back in to say, "Just what the hell was that all about?" One man's private, personal set of rules. Never offer excuses where none will do. No excuse will ever do. Everyone is immersed in two conflicts, one physical and external, and always involving other people. The second, mental and internal, and still involving others, though not as easily seen as in the first instance. A man went into an office with a complaint, "I can't see." And the person therein replied, "Well, why come to me? You think I'm a mystic or something?" The stupid, the insipid, the unstable, and the uncertain must speak with all the sincerity and passion they can muster to be heard. Someone wrote the sight doctor and asked, "What exactly is stupidity?" "A two-eyed man," he replied. Only fish who discover they're in an ocean can take up with profit the study of water. Life one day noted to local conditions, "If metaphors were bullets, I'd be a dead man." And conditions replied, "But isn't the same true for words in general?" And life said, "Boy, have you been around men long enough or what?" There was once an imaginary city up in the hills until some men went up there and made it become real. "Boy," said life, "who can I brag on more than men?" The secret is not so much something that you know as it is something that you become aware that you are a part of. A man sent away for a mail-order mystics kit, but got back a letter demanding that he submit proof that he was of the necessary age and totally lacking in fear. One man sent her away for information about his mind, but erred in directing it to his mind. One man's mind tried to contact life to complain about being caught in the middle of all of this. And after he had already licked the stamp of local conditions, one man was heard to cry out, "What do you mean no chaser goes with it?" A sign on the fence nigh the pigsty said, "Don't forget, neighbors, life is your friend. But more than that, it's really its friend." Two mystics were riding on a train, and after they tired of playing the count the milepost game, one of them asked the other, "How can you tell when you've had enough?" And that one replied, 264. On one planet, the thinking creatures speculated that two deaths were credible: their observable physical one, and the not so noticeable mental one. But they never put their theory to the test, for everyone feared that should they do so, it was possible that the wrong one might get buried first. And someone objects, "Well, I don't get it." Well, of course not. And that's why he's still stuck on this world and you're not. And well, let's hope for the best. The creed of the more alert: if you're not out on your own, then you're not on to anything. Now for some news from our educational desk. Men can only be experts in imaginary fields. And now the farm report. In certain markets, hogs continue to bring higher prices than some men. And unless I'm badly mistaken, several experts objected to this story. History never reported, even in the most obscure journals. Confucius, Zoroaster, Buddha, Lao, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad were all, at one time or the other during their lifetime, turned down for jobs as news anchors. The ultimate, the supreme, all-knowing, all-telling, final determination. If you don't know that you're conscious, you're not. One man thought, if it weren't for me, I might be able to get somewhere, which can be a useful sentiment if you do not take it personally. And someone says, "But my God, how could you not?" Which is why they are still just someone and you're, well, let's still hope for the best. People do experience in their nervous systems ephemeral anomalies which can be made advantageous. But to achieve anything permanent requires a lifetime of constantly mucking about therein. A man asked a mystic, "How long does it take to awaken?" "How long you got?" And peering under his bed one morning, a man was heard to declare, "Well, what a delight in finding you here." Something that was mentioned of late, of which many people seem to derive enjoyment, had to do with, if you recall, the fact that in an oldies show situation, if it is the Temptations, the Drifters, who are advertised to be the performers that night, none of the originals have to show up for the show to carry on. Whereas, for instance, if it is scheduled and advertised that, let us say, Edgar Winter, I think was the original example, was to appear. He has to. The point being, at the original stage of this, that a group can show up, they're still carrying the name, and there not be any of the original members, and there will be, constructively speaking, no objection. Whereas you cannot send in a ringer when it's a one-man situation. Let me shift the context of that based upon something we have been talking about for the last few times, to shift the context and the focus of it. And put it this way, that you can be a member of a choir and miss shows and concerts and not be thrown out of the choir. Whereas the same is not true if you're a solo performer. That alone, I can start off with it metaphorical, but we're going to get into the human mind, an individual's mind. But you can see the situation, that you can be a member of a choir, performing choir, and you can miss planned concerts. And we're speaking of a choir under most classical conditions. I would assume at least we're speaking about 50 members, give or take. And so you not being there is tolerable. You can retain your membership in the choir. Retain your good standing, because in a 50-member choir, we all know how life works, that they're all dedicated, that is their primary pastime and interest in life. But knowing how things are in life, out of 50 people, every show, there will probably be at least one person not there, with a good excuse, as they call it. And the show will go on. Those who even know the number in the audience, those who know the number of the choir, people do not sit there and become disturbed if they happen to count the heads and realize someone's missing. And you can be absent if they're performing several dozen times a year. You can be absent more than once. And no one find, the conductor, the manager of the choir, find nothing very questionable about it. You can retain in good standing your membership in that choir throughout a lifetime, while consistently missing periodic appearances in the choir at shows. A solo performer does not have the same privilege. If it is a solo performer, we would assume, again, knowing life, that surely sometimes during the year, if he's out performing several dozen times a year, that surely sometime during that period, if he does it year in and year out, he will catch a cold, for instance, if we're talking about singing. Something will happen. If it happens more than a few times, I assume you also know, his career is going to suffer. If he continues, if it becomes fairly habitual, even with a good excuse that they announce, well, he's down with the flu again or strep throat, he just simply cannot sing, it's physically impossible, and he sends his deepest regrets. If that happens on anything resembling a consistent basis, his career is in dire straits and could be down the old vocal tubes. So, even though I wasn't going to stay at that point, but there is a certain kind of unrecognized justice afoot in life, and people never notice, that solo performers, for some reason, seem to have better health, can manage their flight schedules better, because somebody in the choir, I was saying health reasons, it wouldn't have to necessarily be that. The choir performs one night in Detroit and the next night in Los Angeles, and you do not appear. One member can not appear and simply show up the next time or send in word, hey, I missed my flight in Detroit, that they weren't on the same plane. And that's taken as a reasonable excuse. Hey, that happens. This is all parenthetical to the heart of it. But no one seems to pay in particular attention to that in life, which simply represents something else that men cannot face up to, that the ordinary mind is not equipped to face up to, which is tied to the idea of where do we come from and what exercises the most influence on man, his genetic background or his environment. Solo performers, for some reason, seem to be able to get to the airport more often on time. Their planes even, things that seem to be on their control, their planes seem to experience less flight delays. Their health seems better. And no one seems to find anything unusual. We have a group over here of 50 people. In one sense, you would think 50 people represent a larger organism than this solo performer. If he's a singer, although he may weigh 300 pounds, you think, well, hey, that's a hefty guy. But over here, we're talking about 50 people times 150 pounds. And you think, well, just organically speaking, the 50 people. What is it about the 50 people that makes it so hard that all of them can show up at one time? That it almost never happens. And whereas this one guy, year in, year out, week in, week out, several times a week, constantly, some way, he shows up and puts on a show. Into parentheses. If you were a member, you can retain your membership with no problem. It doesn't even become any sort of internal problem for you to consistently miss performances. Does anybody see any connection already where I was going to go? Of how people think, how the human mind operates, how what is normally referred to as human intelligence is the dynamics of it in the context of humanity as a whole. There were several news items tonight. One of them pointed out that herds are not held together just by hormones. And for months and months, you've heard news stories and me putting words in people's mouths that apparently, well, not apparently, seem to be a direct slap and a joshing at people speaking in cliches, and that the simple must always stay in fashion to be fashionable. I'm not sure anybody ever got that. If you look around at the simple in life, and that includes the ordinary, but it's a little more visibly striking if you get just a little below what those of using the socio-economic kinds of markings, if you look a little below the middle class. The more simple people are, the more fashion seems to reign. The more that you will notice they will dance alike. If there becomes a kind of a fashion of standing and slouching or however it is, suddenly they're all doing that. And if there becomes kind of a way of walking, kind of soul walk or hip walk or a slouch walk or whatever kind of walk it is, they will all be doing it. And if everybody starts wearing green rings on their first finger, then everybody suddenly is wearing green rings. Just have a clear blue sky. It's just like almost everybody. I never realized what an important fashion statement having a green ring on your first finger. It's all at one time. This is neither here nor there. And any ordinary person could respond to it with a similar sentiment and say, well, so what? The only thing of so what interest to those attempting to do something with their own awareness is that is simply an in-your-face reflection of the non-visible world, and the fashion world, I might add, of the collective intellect of humanity. That is why people now we're speaking of collective humanity out there. There they are. You knew that. Either that or I'm measuring for to order a howitzer. There could be a watermelon from now. And inside of all humanity, there is, as we've been through in many, many picturizations, God, many, that it is a closed system, it is a closed structure, it is its own little condo, it is its own fairgrounds, it's its own ride within the fairgrounds that takes off and speeds up and down and goes here and there and whizzes you about and then stops and you get off and it's right where you started from. Well, hey, they only charge you $8 though. What a bargain. You mean it only cost $8 to be alive? It was a parable, sir. A parable. The man said he spent more than $8 thus far to be alive. Sorry, sir, this is not the refund counter. that this, inside of life, those, we're not commenting, those that inside the structure of life, inside of civilized, ordinary, everyday life, those therein who are considered to be intellectual, do not hesitate, nay, they do not even notice that they speak continually in cliches. And some of you, I would think by now, should have in some way done your own pondering as to what's going on here. You don't just put it off as stupidity. How is it that people in the public eye, people considered to be world leaders, world thinkers, world-class thinkers, can hardly go a paragraph without speaking, without throwing in some contemporary cliche? And it would be easy just to dismiss it as, well, they're stupid, or I don't know, they're not literate enough. There is something more afoot. Did I not stay long enough and really try to get you to, at least theoretically if you don't see it, but to go along with the premise that, boy, this is no sign of intelligence. Nay, to the contrary. How can someone with that kind of credentials, how can someone that the world considers to be one of the leading thinkers stand there and start talking, and just constantly he's using cliches rather than going to what he was saying? He'll start saying, well, and it would sound as though, and I'm not speaking outside the context of the ordinary civilized watermelon thing. In that area, he may be speaking on matters considered amongst collective man of the time to be of extreme importance, having to do with the economic situation of some area, having to do with the political changes going on. Something that the collective of humanity at that time in that place all seem to be agreed. The ordinary, sophisticated, educated, knowledgeable, insightful, alive, concerned people. The man will say, set up what appears to be a potentially interesting, promising premise. He'll say, well, they've asked me to address this matter. They've asked me to consider it, to study it, and to make some proposals the president has, the Pope has, the leading economist, whatever it is. And he says, and I did give it deep thought, and I believe that I have seen certain aspects of it that seems to have escaped the common notice. And suddenly the son of a bitch is speaking in cliches. That it appears to be, first off, that we look upon the fact that there is not an even playing field when it comes to the economic structures between the rich and the poor. Now see, if you're just ordinary, you'd be saying like, well, yeah, now we're getting something, move along. What do you mean move along? This is supposed to be one of our leading thinkers. There is something going on that people never notice. Again, if I pointed out in that manner and I sneered it all, or if I just pointed out to a reasonably hip crowd, that sort of thing, they would think, well, you're about to make some satirical remark, or that was the satirical remark. You were doing a burlesque. You're making fun, people's inattentiveness to the human language, to the king's tongue, or that just, I don't know, people are lazy. I'm not the first. People have attacked the use of cliches. Of course, the beautiful balance, not irony, balance of it is that very often those who attack cliches speak in what? A foreign language, close. But we'll go ahead. Speak in tongues? Well, there is something else afoot. How is it? First off, you must, rather than just dismiss it as being stupid, you would have to then, I suggest, the next stage might be, if I say, well, push it a little bit further, you might go, well, they're not even listening to what they say, which almost sounds like a higher observation or a higher potential critique of men speaking in cliches, rather than they're just stupid, until you again consider, wait a minute, he's considered one of our leading thinkers. You mean you can be a leading thinker? I mean, you can be a world-recognized figure. You can have a Nobel Prize, a Pulitzer Prize. You can be recognized by all of your peers, by all of humanity at some area, as being in your field an expert, and you can still speak, and you don't listen to what you're saying. Is that possible? Ordinary people, of course, as you know, but now would have lost interest. They'd have shut this off already. But then, you're sort of left with that. That can't be the final word. Sheep want to be a member of a flock, and cows have no interest in things non-bovid. And it's not hormones that hold sheep and cow herds together, if of course we're speaking about human herds, and if of course we're speaking about not only human herds, but the cohesiveness of each human's brain, or if you prefer, their thoughts. Cliches, as easy as they are to attack, as easy, as handily as you can get ordinary people to join in if any time you apparently mount any slight assault on cliches, you can get people to go, yeah, you're right. Jesus, that's not a sign of intelligence, that's a sign of stupidity. You're right, you're right, you're right, you're right, you're right. People's thoughts want the familiar. And to say they want the familiar is a charitable understatement. Well, it's an understatement. It may not be charitable, but it is a severe understatement. Cliches represent much more. The reason that they continue to survive, the reason they can survive in the face of what I just described that people do not even normally consider. They would just usually take a random shot, or some comment will be made, well, it's a shame we speak in cliches. And people go, yes, it is. But no one directly notices, which should be of a little interest to start with, that no one notices that world thinkers, world leaders continually use cliches as much as anyone else. And as soon as they use a cliche, if you don't watch other people respond to it, you should be watching your own mind. Your own mind. As soon as the president or some leader will start saying something, and in fact, let us say that it reaches an intellectual at the ordinary level, the ordinary definition of that term, that it starts off and it begins to take on such an intellectual velocity that it's almost beginning to lose. You're almost beginning to lose it. That, well, he is. I'm gonna have to pull myself together here and set your beer down if you're watching TV and think, wait a minute. I wanted to hear this, but this is this is challenging. And he's really taking off like a plane about to go. And he begins to speak, and it's interesting. And he has a way with words even. It almost sounds like a modern Shakespeare, that he just seems to be speaking extemporaneously, and the words begin to flow, and you can feel that there is some kind of intellectual pattern that he has in mind. He's about going faster, and you're thinking, oh, and suddenly he will throw in something about uneven playing field. And it goes so fast no one notices. Forget now of laughing at it. If you could see it, people responding to it, ordinary minds, including your own, it feels very good. And the man does not plan it. No one plans any of this, as you know. Life is writing it all, and don't let that get around. But he will start something that is potentially too complex for the ordinary mind to hear. Not that he plans it. You can look at that he's doing it to himself also. But here he goes, and the plane's about to take off, and it looks like he's going to go into either a flight pattern, or the plane's going to turn into a very obscure flying fortress. And it's like it's beginning to take off, and people's trying to listen, and suddenly it's uneven playing field, and it comes back, and it's suddenly a Piper Cub, and you go, and then you go back again, but, and then you kind of bank over when it's getting a little, too much like that, and you go, of course, we may have to just bite the bullet. And none of it means anything, in a sense, or it's all, as far as having any intellectual content, it's vacuous. And yet it serves a very important purpose. And cliches, those little terms, are just the obvious signposts I can point out. Because once you begin to see it, you don't have to look for cliches. They're not worthy of anybody, an alert person's condemnation or even their notice. Let's do everything that everybody says, and it's a friggin' cliche. It can be the most complex sentence, but if it came from the collective of man, you begin to hear it quite clearly for what it is. It is moo. That's all it ever is. But that's all that people want. And I say all that they want, it's all that they can hear. We sort of left last time when I was talking about good news and bad news. Let me refresh you. Which is tied to the same thing now. Is that the human mind, as it is naturally constructed, consider the possibility that it is not constructed to see or to hear reports of good news. Now, as strange as that may sound at first, I'll put it to you another way. Good news to a cow herd could not be limited, or if you look at it another way, would have to be beyond the sound of moo. It would not only have to not be cliche ridden or even contain cliches, it has got to be skirting at the very edge of a foreign language. It has got to be, it may seem to have a moo subtone to it or overtone to it, but it has got to be, if it was actually good news, it has got to be almost something beyond the moo vocabulary. And I assume everyone understands it's one of the real purpose that fables serve, that you know how I say cows, I'm talking about the human mind, the collective consciousness of man, the collective intelligence of man. But the fables make it easier because everyone knows. I mean, that's obvious to anyone with any sense that a cow or a sheep or any animal only responds to certain sounds that are appropriate, that are instinctively appropriate to that animal. The little baby birds only hear the song of its mother bird. It doesn't respond. Sheep only responds, a llama, whatever, they only respond to the sound of their mother. They only respond to llama sounds. They do not respond to anything else. It's as though it doesn't exist. That is the same situation, although men believe that their minds are something absolutely apart, discrete, separate from everything else in life. Well, they're at least discernibly discrete, separate. Which, as long as you are, which is part of the native structure of the mind, but as long as you are limited to that, you are in the herd, and you will never hear anything. That is, you'll never be able to think of anything outside it. And you can sit there and think, well, I've been on this goddamn train most of my life. Is it going anywhere? I take responsibility for turning the Orient Express into a metaphorical, mystical Orient Express and using the train here for the last few months. But no, the train's not going anywhere. Where the hell do you think it's going? Well, I'm surely on the way to somewhere. You can move around in a cow herd. I mean, the cow herd can be, taking up such and such room. And you can be over here, and you can move over here, you can go over here. You can try to stay on your tiptoes, I guess, or try to buy yourself a ring to go on the first cleave of your hoof. You can try to raise your position. The whole point being, you can move around in a herd, but need I point out the obvious? I assume that now that she's good and dead, her estate can't sue me. A herd is a herd is a herd is a herd. There's only so much you can do with information contained in moo. And it's not even as much as the cows believe. And so to say, well, I've been fooling around with this, I've been on this damn train half my life, where the hell is it going? Well, where the hell do you think it's going? You don't recognize what the train is? Well, I thought it was being involved with maybe some kind of organized collective or some kind of organized mystical. No, calm down there, sir. Don't overheat. You're not sitting in a train car on a mystical express. You're sitting inside your head. And your head is sitting inside of a cow. And that cow is standing firmly, foursquare in the middle of a herd. It's where it belongs. It is comfortable. It is safe. Hey, it's as safe as a baby in a mother's arms. And don't throw it out with the bathwater. And don't put a Band-Aid on a cancer. And any more you want to add. Except people will think, well, now it feels better. It's like you had us all, if you were listening, I say I did it. You got to learn, well, it's what real information will do. It almost is anti-gravitational. That you can feel like your mind begins to float up which many people get involved with this, and they got a different view. They go, well, shit, you're driving me crazy. Close. Same thing. Same thing. It's according to it just shows life protecting itself. It's like a circuit breaker. Those that go, oh, God, say something normal. You're driving me crazy. I can't come back. Okay. It's like a fuse breaker. But there's another way. Those wired up for it. It is you begin to almost float. That is, you can almost get outside the herd. But there is nothing familiar. There is nothing comfortable. And it doesn't mean there's anything dangerous. The reality of what I'm just saying also ends up slips into the hands of the imaginary occultist, is the belief that, the idea of that the great secret work or knowing the secret of all this is in some way a real dark and dangerous thing. That having the knowledge of what life is, well, the Dr. Faustus story is a Western version that you can know too much. It's good that they turned that into fiction, since it's kind of a laugh to think about ordinary people knowing too much. That I don't know what's happened. I used to get better letters of people, shaking their finger and warning. And I've tried to listen to you or read some of what you wrote, and I see what you're up to and what you're getting at. And let me warn you, my good man, there's some things that people should not fool around with. You could be getting into areas of information that is dangerous. Which is no story, as I said, but it's still sort of refreshing, if not just downright funny, to think about the ordinary mind, ordinary people, being concerned over knowing so much that could be dangerous for them. I think, even though we are pushed with time, I think that we should have a few seconds of silence. Okay. The idea of it being dangerous is based upon the fact, if you missed it, is based upon the fact that it is almost otherworldly in the sense, but just in this sense. It's not otherworldly out there. It's otherworldly in here, that it almost has to pull you, almost has to make you float mentally above the mass, the collective thinking of humanity at the time. And it's not that thinking is wrong. You were born into it. It is as right as rain. Boy, there's another one. It is as right as rain. That's the way, if you're sane, if you're wired up more or less like a standard cow or sheep, human, then whatever is the common thinking, whatever is the general consciousness and mental attitude of people in your time and place, that was correct. They're not wrong. This is not right and them wrong. But when you start trying to struggle against it, remember tonight there was a little story about a man that got a good glimpse of the secret and then took as his goal, the way he expressed it was, that he then won complete freedom. That he got a good view of what the secret, what life is about, and then after that he just got a good glimpse. And then he had to him, he could better fashion what his goal was then. His goal became complete freedom. And it went along well enough until he realized he didn't know where he was trapped. He didn't know what it was that he was trapped in, much less. And if you don't know that, you don't know where you're going. Not that one's dependent upon the other. But he realized, yeah, I'm trapped, and he was satisfied in the beginning that his description, now I understand what this is about. It is a struggle for freedom. That's it. Now I got it. Went a long while until it began to strike him in a certain new way, at a new level, that yeah, it's freedom, but I don't know what the hell's holding me anyway. All I know is I am trapped. That as soon as, let's say, he came up with it himself, that he read it or something tripped him off, but let's say that it struck him, I know what it is I'm struggling against. It is a form of absolute captivity. I can feel it now. I see it. Maybe not in its entirety, but I see damn well, I now, to myself, can at least formulate in words what I'm about, what this is about. It is a struggle for freedom. I am trying to free myself from this kind of, where I am, this hold. Many people come up with some version of that. Individuals, whole organizations get based on it. But this one guy is giving him credit. He did not absolutely choke on it, go to sleep in it again. And so he went along with it, and it will work for a while. That was sort of his guiding principle. But then he realized, and when I say went along for a while, you understand I'm insinuating, seemed to make progress, was getting somewhere, was satisfied, more than satisfied. He was delighted that he now had some personal concept that he could even verbalize, at least to himself, what it was, until he realized, wait a minute, I'm struggling against confinement that I recognize, and I can even tell I'm making progress until it strikes him, what do you mean making progress? I don't even know what the hell I'm trapped in. That is being in the middle of the herd, being born rightfully in the herd, being healthy. Everyone around you moves. They have their own little patois, they'll moo. You know, it gives rise to discussions, debates, different cow religions. One person believes in one religion and others in another. That ain't right. But you're there and you're comfortable. Hormones are not all that holds herds together. There is a magnetic, as you should know by now. I mean, you just look out. Just turn on PBS. We all know, ordinary people know, that herd animals cannot survive by themselves. Zoologists and observers, naturalists have even observed not just that a stray sheep gets off by himself and he is easier prey to a wolf. Surely by now they've observed, well, I'll say they have, I'll go ahead and say it all the time anyway like it's a fact. They've observed that even if a sheep does not be taken over, a sole sheep, by a predator, which you would think, well, he's easier prey, obviously, than a whole herd, a whole flock. Even if they're not killed by a predator, once they get off by themselves, they get lost, they just seem to die. They just seem to kind of wilt away. They got food, but they just kind of, we all should know that. Animals that are naturally, they are instinctively herd creatures, flock creatures, they just simply cannot survive alone. It is as though their very life, their passion, their reason, it's just like they have been drained of the ability to survive. Everybody knows that. You can almost see it, that there is a magnetism that draws wolves, sheep, cows, antelope together. They just cannot live. A sheep or a cow cannot imagine living alone. That's not life. If you're not, humans are the same way, of course. But what is not observed is its cohesiveness, its ability to stay stable, its ability to survive at the ordinary level is just as dependent upon that kind of herd familiarity as it is physically. That is the nature of ordinary consciousness. That is the very thing that would-be mystics and everyone who stumbles across any idea of this, that is the very thing against which they are struggling. That's it. You don't have to look for demons. You don't have to look for obscure information or think, well, I don't know what it is yet holding me. Just look. Just look. And if that don't work, turn on PBS again and watch the next one about Thompson gazelles. Look at them, then turn it off and go look in the mirror. And those of you getting better, just look upstairs, look up there, and you go, huh. That's the story of Wishbone. Oh. Got carried away thinking about PBS.